Materia Toure.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Green Party have long campaigned for a fair and democratic electoral process, one that favours all New Zealanders and not just the wealthy few. And I want to pay my respects and homage to the late Rod Donald for his work on this exact issue, his long campaign for MMP, and for a fair electoral process that means New Zealanders are represented in their own parliament. This is, after all, a supposed House of Representatives. The more representative, the better. So it's certainly true that the influence of money on politics is one of the greatest threats to freedom and to democracy. We know that in Aotearoa that wealthy, non-political party actors can intervene in the election process, buying, advertising and distorting the process, favouring their own agenda. And for that reason, modern democracies all around the world have introduced rules to try to limit the influence of money on politics. The Greens believe that our democracy thrives on ideas and not on fat wallets. And our electoral process is the central mechanism by which we are able to ensure that ideas are of greater value than bank balances. Our system is not perfect, and it never will be. But democracy should never be static. It should always be an evolving process ready to meet the challenges of the 21st century. This bill is an important step in confirming New Zealand voters' choice of electoral systems. It establishes a two-stage referenda on our electoral system, and voters will quite rightly make up their own minds as to the kind of electoral system that is best for our country. It is one of the responsibilities of citizenship that in a matter like the electoral system, citizens consider the needs of the country as a whole. We in the Greens do not hesitate in affirming our support for MMP. MMP has meant that more New Zealanders are represented in Parliament and in government. Under the current MMP system, everyone's vote counts equally. MMP has enhanced the representation of women in our society, Māori in our society, Pacifica, Asian people in this House and in society, but not just population sectors. MMP enables different ideas, ideologies, values and solutions to be represented in Parliament and in government. The advent of new parties have gifted this House with a creativity and innovation that was absent during the long reign of the duopoly, Labour and National. It has increased the breadth of Parliament so that it better reflects the country as a whole. And as I say, if we are to have a House of Representatives, then surely a system that increases the representation of New Zealanders is the goal. I know that women MPs in this House, and National Party women MPs in particular, must be very proud of the number of seats that they command in this chamber because of MMP. MMP has delivered real gains for our community. Kiwibank, paid parental leave and home insulation. It has been a success. Now, as to the process, given the constitutional nature of this bill, the legislative process and the substance must be objective, unbiased, even-handed and scrupulous. We called for a process that was independent of government. We looked for a process of public input into the design of the questions in the process. And looking at the substantive process that's laid out in the bill, we believe that some effort has been made to avoid bias and political interference. And I would like to commend Simon Powell's efforts in that regard. Having said that, there is a glaring omission in the legislation which has the potential to seriously undermine its objectivity, to foment bias and to challenge the even-handedness of the process. And I will turn to that gap in a moment. The bill provides for a referendum to take place in 2011 and potentially one in 2014. Both are designed to coincide with the general elections. There's a ballot paper with two questions which ask the voter if they wish to retain MMP or not, and a further question gives a choice of electoral systems. The systems are the same as those discussed in the Royal Commission report, and following the referendum in 2011, if MMP is retained by voters, a review of MMP will take place, and we certainly welcome that review. This House last considered the issue of a referendum on MMP in August 2001, not less than 10 years ago, the majority of the parties at that time were very cautious in rushing constitutional matters of this nature, which we think was wise. And I just want to quote from the review of MMP, actually, from the ACT Party. The review said, "The ACT Party considered that on constitutional matters, prudent societies are conservative. People can look to constitutional changes to fix perceived ills instead of searching for the true causes. Political patterns take time to adjust to changes. Constant changes make it harder to distinguish the causes of problems from the symptoms of change." And what we've found in the last 14 years, which is not that long for an electoral system to be in place, is that MMP provides stable government, robust parliaments, and there are no concerns about New Zealand functioning during a change process under MMP. I do now want to return to the glaring gap of the anomalous position of parallel campaigners, especially those, if history repeats itself, who want to spend up large. Now, the Electoral Act 1993 has provisions for the registration of political parties, and this legislation makes provision for registering promoters, non-political actors, who wish to publish advertising during the period up to the referendum. Now, we've got no issue with the registration of promoters. We must know who is behind any campaign, but registration alone would not have prevented the outrage which Nicky Hager exposed in his book The Hollow Men, when the Exclusive Brethren and the horse racing lobby provided so apparently independent pro-national advertising. So we remain extremely concerned, sir, that there is no spending limit on a referenda, which has the most serious implications for our representative democracy. There are very few other decisions a country can make that are more significant than how the country elects its most senior political figures. It is not a process that should be trifled with. It is not a process that should be left to the market to decide. We know that the 1986 report of the Royal Commission on the Electoral System stated that it is not, quote, fair if some in the community use their relative wealth to exercise disproportionate influence in determining who is to govern and what policies are to be pursued. Now, that comment was in relation to campaigning in an election, but this referenda, I would argue, is an even more constitutionally serious decision. Not only are we deciding how we elect our government, but that decision is binding, one of the few mechanisms we have in New Zealand law to constrain a government. So if less significant democratic decisions, like citizens-initiated referenda, for example, have a spending cap to protect the level playing field, why would we not have a spending cap to protect the level playing field for arguably the single most important constitutional decision that electors can make? Why would we not ensure that this decision is made with the utmost fairness, with the greatest protections, with a level playing field that gives New Zealanders the same opportunities to campaign on these issues? Why is it that the wealthy should be privileged? Now, the government has argued that it did not include a spending cap because they thought that the citizens-initiated referenda spending limit was too low, of 50,000. Well, the answer to that is very simple, Mr. Speaker. You just put it up. You just make it more. That's fine. The principle remains the same, and you make it more. It is not rocket science. It is not difficult. It should have been done before the legislation came to this House. Now, sir, this is not about freedom of expression, although some will argue that. And it's ironic that freedom of expression masquerades as a debate about the right of the wealthy and the privilege to spend as they choose. The fact is that there is an inequality in this country that is suffered by the community across the board. That inequality makes a mockery of those who might rally behind the freedom of expression as a defence to allow the wealthy to continue to manipulate the process because they have the resources to do it. That is not a fair system for choosing an electoral system that has such constitutional significance. Now, the Minister argued for a good process for the referenda on a sound basis on good principle, but then dismissed out of hand the option of limiting spending expenditure. I expect that he is genuine in his concern, and we hope that New Zealanders are able to make substantive submissions on this issue and tell the government that a spending cap is necessary. Our democracy should not be a battle of wallets, but a battle of ideas.